Okay, so in the last class, we were talking about the history of Bitcoin, why there are only 21 million Bitcoins, and what is Bitcoin halving. And we briefly covered the historical data regarding the Bitcoin. In today's class, we'll talk a bit about how Bitcoin transactions happen. That is, how do you initiate a transaction? How do you send a certain amount of money from your account to somebody else's account? And how do you do that? How do you define a Bitcoin address? How you sign your transaction? And how that transaction is sent over to the network into the transaction pool. So basically what we'll cover today is we'll see how the public key, the private key, and your Bitcoin addresses are used for creating transactions, signing transactions, how you lock your cryptocurrency, how you unlock it, and how the transaction record is generated in Bitcoin. So we'll see this shortly. So, as we've already studied when we were talking about the cryptography, when we were studying the encryption algorithm, we studied about the public keys, we also studied about the private keys, and we also saw how digital signatures work, how digital signatures ensure the authenticity and integrity of the transactions. So, we'll apply all of those concepts to see how they are happening in real life with the help of this Bitcoin cryptocurrency. So let us first understand what is the relationship between the public key, the private key, and the addresses, the Bitcoin addresses, in terms of this Bitcoin cryptocurrency. So when we talk about a Bitcoin, not the Bitcoin blockchain, but the actual coin, so the ownership of any coin, any Bitcoin, is identifies the ownership of any Bitcoin is identified, it is established through the use of digital keys, which is the public key, the private key, the Bitcoin address, and the digital signatures. So when we're saying ownership, that is, I say I have 15 Bitcoins, okay, and I want to buy something. How will you know that I have 15 Bitcoins with me? How will you establish that I am the owner of 15 Bitcoins? So if I'm making any payment using Bitcoins, whoever is at the receiving end will have to know that I really am the owner of those Bitcoins. So it is not like, one important thing to remember here is that your Bitcoins are never stored in your wallet. Okay, Bitcoin is not stored in a wallet. It is decentrally stored on the blockchain. That is, your distributed ledger will have entry for the blockchain, and it is stored on the decentralized system. It is not stored in your wallet. So now coming back to the point, as I was saying, that you will need to use the public keys, the private keys, the Bitcoin addresses, and the digital signature in order to establish that you are the owner of the Bitcoin. Also, the digital keys, when saying digital keys, I mean the public key and the private key. They are not actually stored on the network, but they are instead created and stored by user in a file which is known as the wallet. So we'll elaborate on this later. Also, your digital keys that is present in your Bitcoin wallet, it is independent upon the Bitcoin protocol. That is, it is not dependent upon your blockchain. It is not dependent upon the wallet that you're using. And it is created, that is generated and managed by the user's wallet software without any reference to the blockchain or access to the internet. Now, whenever we are talking about encryption algorithms, we were saying that the public key is shared with all, the private key is kept secret. So we'll see how we are using the wallet, how we are generating our public keys, how we are generating our Bitcoin addresses. So keys have like a very interesting property when we talk in terms of Bitcoin. So it is these digital keys that make your system decentralized. That is, your system is decentralized because you have keys that will establish your ownership. You don't need any third party that is maintaining any database to say, okay, you own this amount of money, you own that amount of money. So your key is like a cryptographic proof security model for decentralizing your network. That is, your trust and control is decentralized in your Bitcoin blockchain because we are making use of the digital keys and the digital signatures. Okay. So whenever you generate a transaction on Bitcoin, you will always need to digitally sign that transaction. And we know that in order to digitally sign the transaction, we make use of our secret key or our private key. So we make use of our private key to sign the transaction, we send it onto the network, and that transaction can be verified by any node, any miner, by making use of our public key, which is like, it is not a secret key, it is available with everybody who is transacting on the Bitcoin blockchain network. So here you can see that we are saying we have a public key, we have a private key, and we are trying to understand the relationship between the public key, the private key, and the Bitcoin address. So we know that we make use of public key cryptography, which is also known as asymmetric encryption, to validate the authenticity of something. Okay. So what our public key cryptography does is it makes use of trapdoor functions. Now you can see here we are making use of trapdoor functions. So this elliptic curve multiplication, the hash functions, both of them are trapdoor functions. So what we mean by trapdoor functions is that it is a one-way mathematical function, meaning that it is easy to solve in one direction. So here you can see that we can move with this trapdoor function, which is the elliptic curve multiplication. We can move in the forward direction, same with hash function. We can move in the forward direction, that is, both of them are one way. So we are saying that it is easy to solve for these trapdoor functions in the forward direction, but it is nearly impossible to crack them in the reverse. Why we are saying nearly impossible? While it might be possible, but it would likely take a supercomputer 1,000 of years to reverse engineer these functions. So as mentioned here, you have a public key, you have a private key, which allow you to send and receive Bitcoins. And this combination of public and private key allow you to perform transactions without the need of a third party. And this public key and private key together form your key pair. So now let us see how this public key and private key function. So it says here that your public key allows you to receive cryptocurrency transactions, allows you to receive Bitcoin, while your private key allows you to spend Bitcoins. And the public key is just the shortened form of your public address is just the shortened form of your public key. So let us see all of this in detail, how your public key allows you to receive Bitcoins and how your private key allows you to spend Bitcoins. So we'll see the locking and unlocking mechanism for transacting with Bitcoins. So we are saying that Bitcoin makes use of cryptography to create key pairs. And this key pair is what controls the access of Bitcoin on the blockchain network. Now, we have a private key. This private key, we have a private key which is used for unlocking bitcoins. We'll see how this happens. And we have a public key which is used for locking bitcoins. So let us see how that happens. So suppose we have a sender and we have a receiver. So we are on a blockchain, Bitcoin blockchain network. We have a sender and we have a receiver. So suppose I am the sender. I say I have, say, 4 bitcoins, or rather some abstract number. I say I have some bitcoins, and those bitcoin, as we know, are present on our blockchain. Second. So I'm saying I have, say, I'm on a blockchain, Bitcoin blockchain, and I say that I have some BTC. I have some BTC with me, and I want to use these BTC. I want to send them to somebody else. So for this example, assume that this is your blockchain. We're not going to use it just for imagination. I'm saying I'm the sender, I am the Bitcoin blockchain, and I have some BTC available with me. And I'm saying that since I have some BTC, I want to use them. So what you need to do first is you will have to unlock your funds on blockchain. So when you have some BTC available with you, you will first have to unlock your funds. Since we are on the Bitcoin blockchain, we'll have to unlock our BTC that is present on our Bitcoin blockchain. So when you want to unlock something, you will have to make use of your public key. So unlocking will happen via the unlocking happens via the private key. So unlocking of bitcoins happens via the private key. So I have some bitcoins available with me, but when you want to send some bitcoins, you have bitcoins, but in order to send some, you will have to unlock your funds first. So unlocking happens via the private key. Okay. And I want to send these funds to the receiver. So third step is that I want to send them to the receiver, which in our example is you. So I want to send BTC, some bitcoins to you. So you have some funds available with you. You unlock your funds. Unlocking of funds happen via the private key, and you then want to send those funds. So you have some funds on your Bitcoin blockchain. You unlock them and you send those funds on to the receiver. You want to send them to the receiver. Okay. Now, the receiver wants to receive these funds. So when the receiver want to receive these funds, you need to know the public key of the receiver. Okay. It is a bit complex, but just try to understand. I have funds, but for spending those funds, I have to unlock my funds first. And for unlocking, we make use of the private key. So I have unlocked my I have unlocked my funds, I have unlocked my bitcoins, and I want to send those Bitcoins to you. Okay. So because I want to send those Bitcoins to you, what you have to do is, the receiver has to do is, the receiver needs to give me his public key. So I need to have the public key of the receiver. So when I want to send some funds to you, I need to know your public key. Okay. So now what I will do is, I will take some Bitcoins. I will take some Bitcoins. Suppose I have, say, 2 BTC. And I will take this 2 BTC. I will lock this. I will perform a lock on this 2 BTC and lock this using your public key. That is the public key of the receiver. So I'm locking this transaction again. When I was spending it, I want to spend it, I unlocked this funds. So unlocking I did with my help of my private key. Then after I had like unlocked my funds, I wanted to send them to you. Now, in order to send those Bitcoins, some Bitcoins to you, I need to know your public key. So when I receive your public key, what I'll do is I will use the funds, make use of the your public key to lock those funds. I have unlocked those funds to spend it. I will lock them again. Okay. So I am locking those funds using your public key. So I'm taking the receiver's public key and locking some Bitcoins using it. Then what I'll do is I will send this locked Bitcoin. That is, the Bitcoin is now locked. So the fourth step is I am locking the Bitcoins. I will then send it to you. So I'm doing what I'm doing here is Bitcoin that is locked with your public key is being sent to you. So what I'm doing is send Bitcoins locked with receivers public key. So the public key is, okay. Now I have sent you some Bitcoins which is locked with your public key. And now because you have the corresponding private key, you can access the Bitcoins. So on the sixth step, what will happen is I am sending Bitcoins. The Bitcoins are logged with your public key and you will receive Bitcoins at your Bitcoin address. So this is the complete picture. We have more to it, but let us first understand why we are doing this. Now, if you carefully observe, the private key is never being transmitted on the network. I had my private key. I simply used it to unlock my funds. Okay. I did not transmit it on the network. So the reason why we are making use of this locking and unlocking mechanism and we are locking using the public key is because we do not want to send our private key through an unsecure channel. Also, when you send me, if like I am sending you your public address, because suppose you want to receive something, you want to receive some Bitcoin. So you are sending me your public address, and I can only lock Bitcoins for you. I cannot unlock it, because if I am able to unlock it, I will be able to spend it. So we have a sender, we have a receiver. I have some Bitcoins with me, but if I want to spend those Bitcoins, I will always have to unlock them. And in order to unlock them, I will use my private key. So I have some Bitcoins. I unlock my Bitcoins using my private key. And then I want to send some of those Bitcoins to you. Now, since I want to send some of those Bitcoins to you, I need to know your public key. Since like public key is a key that is known to all, it doesn't have to be a secret. So I receive your public key, either you send it or it is maintained on the network or any cloud server. So I make use of your public key. So I lock the Bitcoin with your public key. Okay. I lock the Bitcoin with your public key, and I send the Bitcoins which I have locked with your public key. And now you will receive the Bitcoins at your Bitcoin address. That is, whatever address your funds are stored at. Now, see, the receiver has received some Bitcoins, but those Bitcoins are locked. Okay. So if this is, say, Tom, and here we have another user, Bob. We have Tom and we have Bob. So Tom has received 2 Bitcoins. So Tom has 2 BTC available with him. Okay. And but if Tom wants to send these 2 BTC to Bob, initially Tom had 0 BTC. Okay. This sender, this sender sent 2 BTC to Tom. So now the receiver, which is Tom, has received 2 BTC. But if Tom in turn wants to send this 2 BTC to Bob, Tom will again have to perform the unlocking operation, because I have sent locked funds to Tom. Now, in order to spend this, Tom will have to unlock this 2 BTC. He will have to unlock this 2 BTC. And we know that when you want to unlock something, you make use of your private key. So this is how the public key, the private key, and the Bitcoin addresses are used for sending and receiving. So your public key allows you to receive Bitcoins. So this receiver Tom is sharing his public key because he wants to get some Bitcoins. Okay. So always remember, public key will allow you to receive Bitcoins by locking Bitcoins for the recipient. So Tom is the recipient here. He wants to receive some Bitcoins. So he is sharing his public key. So I am locking some coins for him using his public key, and his public key is allowing him to receive some Bitcoins. So public key is used for locking, and it will allow you to receive Bitcoins. Private key is used for unlocking Bitcoins, and it will allow you to spend Bitcoins. If this is not clear, you can please ask if there is any doubt till now, because we'll see some more concepts and this needs to be really clear. So if anybody has any doubts, please do ask. I will repeat it once again. We have a sender and we have a receiver. The sender has some bitcoins. Let us say the sender is Alice. For example's sake, we'll say that the sender is Alice and the receiver is Tom. Now, this sender Alice has some bitcoins with her. So if sender wants to send some bitcoins, so if Alice wants to send some bitcoins to Tom, what she'll have to do is she will have to unlock her bitcoins first. So she has, in order to like spend the bitcoins, Alice will have to unlock the bitcoins. And in order to unlock the bitcoins, she will need to use her private key. Okay. So Alice wants to spend her bitcoins. That is, Alice is the sender and she wants to send some bitcoins, spend some bitcoins. And in order to spend bitcoins, she will have to unlock those bitcoins. And in order to unlock those bitcoins, she will have to use her private key. So Alice has some bitcoins. She will have to unlock her bitcoins using the private key. Now Alice wants to send these bitcoins to the Tom. Now Tom is the receiver here. So Tom wants to receive bitcoins. So when you want to receive bitcoins, you lock bitcoins. Okay. And locking happens via the public key. So Tom is the receiver here who wants to receive bitcoins. So we are locking the bitcoins, whatever Tom wants to receive, and locking happens via the public key of the receiver, which is Tom in our case. So we need to know the public key of the receiver. Then finally, we are locking the bitcoins using the public key of the receiver, and we are sending the locked bitcoins with the receiver's public key. And the receiver is receiving the bitcoins at his Bitcoin address. So initially Tom had 0 BTC, but after Alice sent him 2 BTC, his balance becomes 2 BTC. Now, if Tom wants to spend this 2 BTC, if Tom wants to spend this 2 BTC, then again we follow the same process. Here Tom wants to spend 2 bitcoins, so he will have to unlock the bitcoins, and in order to unlock the bitcoins, he will use his private key. So Alice's private key stays with her. Tom's private key stays with him. So Tom's private key stays with Tom, and Alice's private key stays with Alice. And the reason why we're doing this is because we do not want to send our private key through an unsecure channel. And why we don't want to send our private key over an unsecure channel, or even if it is a TCP, IP, UDP, any kind of channel that we're using. The reason why we don't want to send our private keys is because if you like make use of private key and you send your private key, it means it will allow anybody to unlock your bitcoins. Because when you want to spend bitcoins, you need to have your private key. So if private key is not kept secure, what will happen is anybody who has your private key will be able to use and spend your bitcoins. Okay. So this is the reason why you do not keep your private key on the network. And I'm not sure if you know, if you in most of these crypto exchanges, in most of these crypto, like these Bitcoin wallets, what they do is they will provide you with a physical key, your physical, like it has a paper key. It is either a 256-bit number, or it is a 64-bit hexadecimal number, or you can always get, or either you can get a QR code. So this private key is never kept on the network, because if you lose access to your private key, you will lose your funds. A lot of people have lost their private keys and they were never able to access their bitcoins again. And when they lost their private key, they also lost access to their wallets also. So this is the reason why we do not make use of our private key, do not send our private keys over the communication channel. So this is the relationship between the public key, the private key, and your Bitcoin address. So the public key is used for locking funds, that is when you want to receive some Bitcoins. Private key is used for unlocking funds or unlocking Bitcoin when you want to spend some Bitcoins. So this is the relationship between the public key, the private key, and the Bitcoin addresses. That is, we make use of some trapdoor functions, some encryption algorithms, which function only one way. That is, they allow you to move in the forward direction, but the reverse engineering of these functions is not possible. So, when you install a Bitcoin software, the Bitcoin software provide you, will ask you to generate your private key. And they use a lot of algorithms in order to generate the private key. So what we do is, mostly what the operating systems do is, they will ask you to randomly pick a 256-bit number. Okay. And this number needs to be between 0 and n minus 1. This n is a constant and the value of n is given here. It is 1.1578 into 10 to the power 77, and this value is something around 2 to the power 256, a little bit less than 2 to the power 256. So when you start using, when you download the Bitcoin software, it will ask you to create your private key. And what you do is, you will take a large string of random bits, you will pass it through the elliptic curve digital signature algorithm. You will pass them through the digital signature algorithm and again pass it through an SHA-256 algorithm, which will produce a number which will be 256 bit in length. So this number will be your private key. Now using this private key, you will again pass it through elliptic curve digital signature algorithm. What this will do is, it will make use of the elliptic curve multiplication function and create your public key for you. So you are yourself generating your private key by making use of the elliptic curve multiplication and then again hashing it. Then you get your private key. This private key is passed through the elliptic curve multiplication algorithm and you get your public key. So now, even though your public key is out in the open, nobody can use this public key to get your private key, because reverse engineering, as previously mentioned, is almost impossible. So you use your public key to use your private key to get your public key, and then you hash your public key through SHA-256 algorithm and you get your public address. And this public address for Bitcoin systems is 160 bit in length. So here is an example of how your public addresses, your private key, your public key looks like. So your public and private key will always be 256 bit in length when we are talking about the Bitcoin blockchain. And your address, your Bitcoin address where you receive your funds, will be 160 bit in length. The address will be 160 bit in length. Now, as I was previously saying, that your private key can be of many types. It can either be a 256 character long binary code, that is, you can have a 256-bit key, or it could be a 64-digit hexadecimal code. It can be a 64-digit hexadecimal code. It could also be a QR code, and it could be a mnemonic phrase. So your private key can take either of these forms. So when you're talking about a QR code, now there are like many coffee shops in United States that allow you to pay for coffee using your bitcoins. I don't think it happens now because the value of bitcoin has like increased tremendously, but like you, some coffee shops and some like uh, some commerce application, e-commerce applications still allow you to pay with your Bitcoin cryptocurrency. So what they do is like if you visit any merchant website, they allow you to pay with UPI. That is, they simply ask you to scan this QR code and you are directed to your UPI portal where you can pay with your UPI ID. So here also with bitcoins also, what happens is some shops have recently started accepting bitcoin payments. That is, they have added the option of bitcoin as on their point of sale system. So suppose you are on some cafe and the price of coffees are listed in their local currency. So if you're talking about United States, the price of the coffee would be listed in US dollars. But at the counter, customers also have the option of paying in either dollars or in bitcoins. So if I place an order for a cup of coffee at some coffee shop, what the point of sale system will do is that as soon as I scan the QR code, it will convert the total price from US dollars to Bitcoin at the present market rate, and it will display the price in both currencies. And it will also, like, you are using the QR code which contains a payment request for the transaction. So there are many payment request QR code that can be used to like use them for payments also. And there are many QR codes available. Like if you install a wallet, if you download the Bitcoin software, they will provide you with a hard copy of your key, which is encoded in the form of QR codes. So your private key can take many forms. It could be a 256-bit key. It could be a 64-bit 64-digit hexadecimal code. It could be a QR code. It could be a mnemonic phrase, etc. So this was a brief introduction to how the public key, the private key, and the Bitcoin addresses relate to each other. Next, we'll talk a bit about Bitcoin transactions. So when we say transaction, in simple terms, what a transaction actually means is that a transaction will tell the network that the owner of a certain number of Bitcoin has authorized the transfer of some of those Bitcoins to another owner. So what the transaction actually is doing is it is used to change the ownership of Bitcoins. So suppose Alice is the owner of some Bitcoins, she will make use of the transaction to send some Bitcoins to Bob. So a transaction here is used to tell the nodes on the blockchain, Bitcoin blockchain network, that the ownership of like 2 bitcoins or 3 bitcoins has been transferred from Alice to Bob. So the transaction tells the network that the owner of certain number of bitcoins has given the authority to transfer those bitcoins to another owner. And the new owner can now spend these bitcoins by creating another transaction that authorizes the transfer of bitcoins to another owner. So here what we are doing is we are creating a chain of ownership. Now do you understand? If suppose I have some bitcoins, I create a transaction, I have 10 bitcoins, I create a transaction and I want to transfer those 10 bitcoins. So I am creating a transaction saying that I want to transfer some bitcoins to you. So now with the help of that transaction, the network will know that I am not the owner of those bitcoins anymore. You are the owner of those bitcoins. So a transaction is like an authorization of transfer of some bitcoins. So again, now you have 10 bitcoins. You want to transfer those 10 bitcoins to your friend. So what happens now is you will again create a transaction and you will authorize the transfer of those 10 bitcoins to your friend. Your friend again can create a transaction and send those 10 bitcoins to another person. So you see here, it is creating a kind of a, like you're able to trace the transactions. So if your friend, from your friend up till me, the transaction, that is the transfer of 10 bitcoins, is traceable. So what I'm saying here is I have, suppose say 10 BTC. I have 10 BTC available with me, and my address is some address like say 0x123. I have a hexadecimal code address, as we have seen, and I have the amount, I have the address. So I'm saying that I am trying to transfer this amount of money to you. So I will create a transaction, and this transaction will contain the amount, is 10 BTC. It will contain my Bitcoin address, whatever my Bitcoin address is, and it will also contain the digital signature that will verify that I have created the signature transaction. So certain information is present in the transaction. We'll see that information, the exact information available in the transaction later. But for now, what I'm saying is that I am transferring this amount to you. Okay. So now, if previously you had say 5 bitcoins, now your amount becomes 15, and you will also have some address. Okay. Now you send the same, you will create a transaction again to say spend the 10 bitcoins, and you send this to your friend. Your friend now receives 10 bitcoin. Your friend wants to send this to somebody else. So you can see the ownership of these 10 bitcoins. First, I was the owner of these 10 bitcoins, then you became the owner of the 10 bitcoins, then your friend became the owner, and then your friend of friend became the owner. So it creates a chain of ownership. You see, for the 10 bitcoins, we can trace the ownership of Bitcoin. Now, the transaction is simply allowing us to identify who has the bitcoins, who is the current owner of those bitcoins. So this is with respect to some currency. Now, if you're talking about a blockchain, which is not for like transferring money, suppose we have a blockchain that works for like some antiquities. So example, if I have a very old painting with me, I say that that painting belongs from the 1700s. Okay, I sell it to some art dealer. The art dealer sends to somebody, that somebody sells to somebody else. So if a new buyer comes into the market and if that data is available on the blockchain, then that new buyer will be able to trace the ownership of that painting. So you can see how recording transactions create a, like a history of transactions on the blockchain. So I think I'll stop here if you don't have time. Otherwise, I can continue for 10 more minutes. Do you have another class to attend, or can I continue for 10 more minutes? People have already started dropping their enrollment numbers. Okay, we'll stop here for now. Does anybody have any doubts up till now?